What is the worst way you or someone you know has been fired from a job? My dad told me once about a coworker getting fired on Take Your Daughter to Work Day. It was before lunch too, so they both had to be escorted out of the office carrying their brown paper lunch bags. Story 2. One capable IT employee was in the hospital due to an unexpected health emergency. They went to the hospital and fired him before his heart surgery. I crap you not. Story 3. I worked in retail and our manager fired a guy after his 12-hour shift on Black Friday. Could have spent the day after Thanksgiving with his family, but instead, the manager made him work in case it was busy, then fired him at the end of his shift. It was a douche move. Story 4. I had a friend who worked in an office doing office-type crap. One day, his boss croaked and he was made interim boss. Anyways, he busted his ass in order to try and keep his new position. A month later, he interviewed. A week later, his boss called him into the office and said, "You know, we really wanted to hire you. I was rooting for you, but someone with more experience and qualifications got the job. Do you mind training him?" They asked him to train his replacement. Story 5. When I was in my early 20s, I was about 9 months into a job at a retail store, and I had been working my ass off for a chance to be part of a new department that the store was about to open. I aced my review and I got the promotion to the brand new department. It was going to be more challenging work. It came with a pretty hefty pay bump. I would have my own office, and the work would be impactful to the whole company. The promotion didn't kick in until the start of the next week. I was laid off that Friday. When they were asked to cut payroll, management literally selected the people who were making the most money. My name was listed next to the salary I hadn't yet received. Instead of admitting that they ducked up and keeping their best performing employee at that store, they doubled down and tried to hold my last paycheck ransom until I trained my replacement in the job that I hadn't even done yet. The store owner just happened to be around that day. Normally, he was a very kind man and knew everyone by name. I tried to explain the ridiculous situation to him, and he just told me to go home. In a rare moment of frustration, I said something to the effect of, "You know, bullcrap like this kills stores." He coldly replied, "Hastings will be around longer than you." I guess the joke is on him. Story 6. Friend of mine helped secure a big contract for the company he was working for. An incentive for getting contracts is you get a percentage of the profit. He just started working there about 2 months prior and went out on his own several states away to talk to a potential customer from a lead. He got at a convention, basically, "Oh yeah, I have a buddy who's looking into that. You should meet him," in person out of his own pocket. He secured the deal, called his supervisor to tell him, was congratulated, then drove 12 hours back home. His payout would have come out to around $40,000 over 5 years, went into work the next day, and was fired for suspicion of theft. And the boss of the division, not the supervisor, that guy is lower, would be taking over all his current stuff. He lawyered up immediately, but since he was still on his probationary period, and they could fire him without cause, nothing but the finder's fee, around $3,000, was to be paid to him. Basically, his boss tossed him to get some free money. Story 7. I was working 20 foot up a ladder on the side of a house. I hear a BB gun fire, and the pellet hit the wall a few feet beside me. After a couple more of these, I turn around to tell the fat kid standing in the yard, if he does that crap again, he better be able to outrun my hammer. 15 minutes later, I'm unemployed. Story 8. Was fired 3 days after my kid was born for missing time because I requested the weekend that my ex was in labor off, got the go-ahead from my supervisor, but I guess that never made it upstairs to the top boss because they got rid of me. Story 9. I was a teacher at a Christian private school in Jakarta for about a year before I was removed. Going into the job, I fibbed a bit, saying that I was a practicing Christian as the pay was pretty solid and had a buddy working there who did the same. Anyhow, the year goes by relatively smoothly aside from constant headbutting with the head of English, Jimmy. I was teaching grades 10 and 11 IGCSE and as English language. And after the initial transition phase, my students really took a liking to my teaching methodology. Mr. Jimmy was a very strict, by-the-book, examinations every 2 weeks type of teacher, and I wasn't. I went in and figured for the kids to do well. They first needed to enjoy it. And so I spent the good part of my first few weeks getting the kids interested in various readings, neat ways of looking at writing, etc. Anyhow, this didn't sit well with Mr. Jimmy, and so we would have constant debates and staff meetings over the way I was teaching my courses. He was the head of English, I was new, I get it, but my kids were eating it up, and they were doing better than ever. Anyhow, between our clashes and my lack of enthusiasm for going to chapel every Friday afternoon, my time at the school came to a head towards the end of the school year. As the grade 10s missed chapel one Friday to sit a test, Mr. Jimmy decided that he would give his own to the grade 10s. So one Wednesday morning, myself and the other grade 10 homeroom teacher took our classes to Jimmy's sermon, and boy oh boy was it something. Now, just to give you an idea of Jimmy, this dude is an ultra-conservative Christian from the sticks of West Virginia. Heavyset, short, and slow, speaking with a thick drawl. He constantly reminded students that humans couldn't have evolved from monkeys. I'm not much for Abrahamic religion, but it's never really bothered me either, and I find it's more the wingnut members of the religion that tarnish the name, and Jimmy was definitely one of these. Anyhow, we get to the little session, and Jimmy says that this session would be about defending you faith, which didn't bode well. He started the shindig by talking about being assaulted, insulted, and mocked by all of the Muslims, running around Indonesia, hating Christian. Oh boy. I had been in Jakarta for 2 years by that time, and despite the recent unfortunate elections in the city, it's a very moderate place, and country in general. Not once had I heard anyone mock any religion, nor do you see people proselytizing or pushing their faith on others. Sorry, I take that back. Everywhere except this Christian school. Anyhow, I kind of reached my boiling point. I'm against religions of any kind being in schools, and raise my hand and ask, Mr. Jimmy, don't you think that we should just do what Jesus did and turn the other cheek? He looks in my direction, keen to my discontent, and responds that, no, we need to give our children of God ammunition with which to fight the people that insult our religion. After my question, a few other students who had talked to me in private about their lack of faith, questioning of faith, atheism, etc., began to raise their hands. Jimmy goes nuts. He starts rattling off Bible passages, shouting, telling the students that it was no place for questioning. It is a school, isn't it? And generally throwing a temper tantrum. I had had enough. I got up quietly and left the room. 2 weeks later, while my grade 11 students were sitting there as exams, and whilst I was invigilating, I was asked by the vice principal to head downstairs to meet the head of the school. I was told that I didn't present a uniform front for the school, called into question my own religiosity, caused students to begin questioning religion, and undermined my senior. I presented my case, explained that had Jimmy heard the same sermon, but in an Islamic school, he'd likely label them terrorists as the subject matter was just too extreme. They didn't hear me out and gave me 2 options. 1, resign with a payout for the rest of my contract, about 2 months. 2, or be fired and get nothing. Realizing that it wasn't worth the time and effort, I resigned. A few days later, all of the teachers and students wore purple ribbons to school as a show of solidarity for me. Parents called the school upset. The head of the school ended up resigning and moving countries. Later, I also found out that 90% of my students ended up with A and a mark. The rest earned B's, and they were the highest ranked classes in the past few years at that school. I still keep in contact with some of my students from the school, and life only got better after leaving. So, whilst it makes a fun story, it only impacted my life for the better. Story 10. It's a long story, but I was early in my career. I wasn't fired for a good reason, and I hadn't really stood up for myself yet. I just took abuse from management and did the best I could. It was my GM's birthday, and we all had to pick names out of a hat, and we had to buy them a cake, etc. for their birthday. Well, I had the GM who wanted to do his birthday in the morning with bagels. So I picked up 30 plus bagels, cream cheese, giant thing of coffee, and we had this stupid bagel birthday thing or whatever. Half hour later, I get back to my desk. I'm called to HR and I was fired. Oh, and thanks for the bagels. Story 11. I know someone who went to his company mailbox and found a paycheck. It was stamped term check. He went to his manager and asked about it. She said, oh, about that. You were fired. Story 12. Ex-public accountant here in '09. One of the firms in my city laid off about 30% of its staff without warning a week after busy season, i.e. these poor accountants just worked 80 to 100-hour weeks with no days off for the last 2-3 months for an annual $50K salary. I would have literally taken off my boss's high heel and tried to stab her in the jugular, Happy Gilmore style, if she would have pulled that crap on me. Story 13. Okay, I've seen a few. A colleague of mine came into work one morning with me, and his clocking in card didn't work. Didn't think much of it until he got to his computer desk, when none of his logins worked. He saw the wood for the trees and just got up and left, wishing me the best of luck. I called him a day later, and they still had not told him he was fired. I inquired to the boss about him, and even the boss was clueless. HR director had sacked him for poor financial performance when the chairman hadn't even approved it. As far as the chairman was concerned, his results were not that poor, and he was giving it 110%. Chairman could not reverse the firing without undermining the HR director, so he called the HR director into his office and demanded an explanation. A month later, she was also fired. A colleague of mine at an IT software firm on the support desk was unceremoniously canned after becoming visibly upset on a support call. She was in tears because a nasty customer had berated her for not responding fast enough, but she had almost zero training. The manager went to her desk, gave her a box of tissues and gave her a hug. Then, as word got round, HR got involved and told her to pack up her desk. They sent her a letter the next day which told her that in no uncertain terms that her breakdown was unprofessional and gross misconduct. I left 3 weeks later. The most ridiculous sacking I've ever seen. Worked in retail, a colleague came back from maternity leave after taking 9 months out and was a bit shaky/nervous and had zero training on the new till system and made 1 or 2 small mistakes. Management gets word, and the senior area manager comes in. The senior area manager. This is a guy who is paid $120K a year and deals with strategic decisions around an area of 20 stores suddenly turns up. The store manager and the senior area manager go over to the tills and he just says, "Okay team, spot check, let's see how you're performing. Just do what you do normally." I am thinking, what the duck? Then I put 2 and 2 together. After about 2 minutes, they went to the ladies' till who had just come back from maternity leave. She made a mistake while they were watching. The senior guy says, "Okay, don't worry, no harm done. Get it right this time. Take your time." She does another sale, and the price comes up incorrect, and she has to ask for a check from the store manager. Senior manager says, "Okay, no problem. Happens all the time, I bet, but let's get this one right, yeah?" 3rd time's a charm. The lady is visibly shaking, sweating, nervous as duck. Next customer comes along with a huge basket full of items. She started scanning after saying hello. The new system is faster, but it can miss some items when it beeps, and we had to check everything against the basket. The price comes up, and it's too much. Customer complains to the lady, who apologizes and goes back to check the basket. Senior area manager just says, "Okay, lady, if you could step off the till and come with me, please." She just looks at him with surprise and horror. "Let's go, now." Store manager steps on the till. I never saw her again. I asked the store manager later that day, and he told me in confidence that she was sacked immediately for those mistakes. He also told me they were looking for an excuse to fire her because she had taken the max maternity leave, and the company wanted to reduce staff budgets to non-essential staff. She was deemed non-essential because she had been off for so long, and the store had been running fine without her. They didn't bring an attempt to cover her maternity leave. As I was young at the time, I could not afford to quit and didn't have any experience, so I couldn't really find a better job. Absolute disgusting treatment of a hardworking employee. The management at this company were pigs. Story 14. Told my boss I had a 2-week mandatory training block coming up with my reserves unit. Got told there's no way I'm not working during that 2 weeks. Told him it's not like I have a choice. Got fired. I told a buddy of mine about the situation, a guy from my unit, and he offered me a job, which I took. I am doing better now, and am happier than if I was still at the old place. You can probably tell it was not the best place to work. I guess my right to pursue the legal matter is still there. And even though my boss is an a-hole for handling it the way he did, I've let go of the anger, and quite frankly, I don't think much about him or the job anymore. Story 15. I got fired because my boss ducked up and blamed it on me. I started my own business in the same field and made all key people leave my former employer and work for me instead. A year later, they had to file for bankruptcy, the malicious delight. Story 16. I worked for this woman who owned a bakery business with several locations. She was a Class A lunatic, but she paid well, and for the most part, I loved my job. I was constantly told I was one of her best employees, and one day she wanted me to be a manager at one of the stores. Honestly, I gave my all at that job because she paid me well above minimum wage for someone who had zero experience in a bakery position prior to hire, and I enjoyed making cupcakes for a living. 3 weeks before Christmas, she came into the store and told me that if the police showed up to give her a call in her office so she could come upstairs to meet them. Weird, but she was always dealing with something crazy, like a customer she insulted or the like. Anyways, the cops came and she took them into her office to talk to them, and that was that. Well, after we closed the store that night, she called me aside and accused me of stealing money out of the register. She has cameras all over her store and told me she had hidden ones even the employees didn't know about. She caught me doing suspicious things on camera, such as taking an envelope off the counter and coming back into the store after I had already locked up to get something I forgot. Just weird and baseless accusations. She told me she had called the cops on me to file a police report, and they would be wanting to talk to me at some point. She then fired me and took away my keys for the store, and I left. I was devastated, and for the following week, I was a nervous, depressed wreck. I had never taken anything from her, ever. I later found out from a friend who still worked there, she told every single employee I stole $3,000+ from her, and probably stole her checkbook as well because it was missing. Again, this lady was insane, and I have no doubt she's the type of person to put her checkbook on top of her car and forget about it while driving away. She also told everyone who still worked there they weren't allowed to talk to me at all. That also really upset me because I really enjoyed my coworkers, but I knew most of them were so afraid of her and losing their jobs if they didn't bend to her every whim, they just obeyed. For weeks after being fired, she'd randomly call and text me, and if I didn't immediately answer, she would call and text my girlfriend and threaten to have the police come to our house if I kept ignoring her. Finally, she stopped. Until about 2 weeks ago, she started harassing me again, trying to set up some sort of meeting to talk about why she fired me. But I pretty much told her it can be a phone conversation, or she can duck off, and I haven't heard from her since. Honestly, I'm waiting for some crazy letter saying she's trying to sue me for God knows what. Crazy-ass ex-boss wouldn't stop harassing me and lying about me for God knows what reason. Story 17. This one resonates to me as I was let go 3 weeks ago. So, story time. I was hired at a company back in October by a woman whom I consider the best boss I ever had. Awesome person, kick-ass marketer. We are still friends to this day. Anyway, at the end of December, before we go on a New Year break, she tells us she is leaving for a much better company. I don't blame her. The company is awesome. Now, when we get back, I instantly inherit all of her work and basically become a director of marketing without the title. I proceed to bust my ass to pick up all the new duties, make sure everything is attended to, and try to make a case for being the replacement. Well, the VP goes ahead and does interviews. We meet with some candidates. Ultimately, they hire the one who was my last choice of the four. I didn't like her. She was just off. Anyway, I take it in stride and just go back to doing my job well. For the next 3 weeks, I proceed to continue doing all of the work I was doing before she arrived, and then some, while teaching her the business and how we did things. Well, 3 weeks ago today, I come into the office, go about my routine, and then get pulled into an office where I see HR. I instantly feel sick to my stomach. She then proceeds to terminate my position due to budget, and I am let go. No severance, no real explanation, nothing. So basically, I manned a department for nearly 4 months, trained the new director, and was then laid off by her 3 weeks into her tenure. Oh, and I found out she quickly replaced me with a friend she had worked with at 4 other companies. Needless to say, it sucked, and I was livid. Story 18. We were having a departmental meeting, and the head of engineering, Myron, was giving a speech about how all of our customers are happy and how all of his ideas are ducking awesome. Both of these were very false, so he was either lying or is disillusioned. Next, his boss is giving her presentation, and the little email message popped up at the bottom corner of the screen saying, "You need to fire Myron." Myron was soon fired, and good riddance. Story 19. At my previous work. I'll do it in chronological order. They fired 2 employees who had been there for nearly 30 years after relocating their job to an Eastern country cheaper. Oh, by the way, they sacked them both on the 23rd December. Happy Christmas. They sacked a girl in my team on a Friday morning. On the Thursday, she was actually home working, so they told the rest of the team before even telling her. When I arrived in the morning, I actually saw her coming out of the building. She told me they sacked me. It must have been obvious on my face that I knew because she asked me. I told the truth. That was horrible. That company was awful. They sacked one of my colleagues after 17 years because he cost them too much money. So they wanted to hire younger people that they would pay basic salary. Because he had been there for 17 years, he had more than 1 year notice. In my country, you have to come to work during that notice. But most employers decide to just give you the money and you don't come working anymore. If they decide to make you work during that period, it's because if you find a job before the end of the notice period, they don't have to pay you the full amount of money. So the guy's currently still working. But they finally told him he could stop at the end of this month instead of the end of July and just have the money. What did they tell him? I hope you are aware we are doing you a favor here. Me. They sacked me just 1 week after I came back from surgery. I was 2 weeks off. The HR guy had made clear many times before that he actually loves how in the US, you don't get sick leave. Well, tough, because 45% of my gross salary goes to taxes, which means I am entitled to take time off after a ducking surgery. So 5 days after I came back, he told me I was sacked, gave me a bunch of excuses, that I wasn't motivated to meet our clients, which was untrue. That client was unhappy with my work. Yeah, he probably is because he was not my client, etc. In the end, he told me, well, you don't seem too shocked or sad of our decision because you're not crying. WTF? I am supposed to cry? Would you like that? Meanwhile, they had brought my colleagues in another room while I was sacked to give them the news. Half of them were crying because it was so unexpected. The HR guy escorted me back to my office to be sure I wouldn't steal anything, and he watched me in that big open space, getting my stuff in my bag. Last one, I won't get too much into details because there is a current case. The girl is suing them. Basically, they fired her during a period where her contract was protected by law. Not birth, but the same principles apply. Basically, they could have sacked her, but had to wait for another 6 or 7 months before doing it. Why? Apparently, she still had a few holidays to take after a long time off work, and she was legally obliged to take them. Yep, it's in the law. But they thought it was rude of her to take her holidays after she had been off such a long time. Well, the state says she must. What did you intend to do? Something illegal, I bet. Needless to say, this was the crappiest place I've ever worked for. The job in itself was really interesting and fun, but the bosses and HR people were the biggest pieces of crap on this earth. Story 20. Once when I worked in an office, they told us that we had to visit corporate for a presentation about harassment in the office. We were broken into groups to go on different days. Monday, Thursday, the groups got a video on harassment. The Friday group got fired en masse. The whole thing was a setup. Story 21. My first job ever was for Baskin-Robbins when I was 15. I went in for my first day of training, excited to finally be making pocket money. The owner made me try to memorize the ice cream flavors in the first 30 seconds of being there. When I was unable to recite them perfectly in their order, he did this big hand motion and screamed, "Training over." I laugh now, but man, that was crushing for a nervous teenager. Story 22. I was a nanny for a horrid woman for a year and a half. What started off as a normal schedule and a good working relationship quickly turned into me working 55 plus hours a week, and they stopped paying me for staying later and driving their kids to practice. The mom was awful to her 8-year-old daughter for being overweight, and the stepdad to the older two, would cuss out the older two kids because he didn't like them. The parents also couldn't control the 2-year-old because they refused to discipline her. It got to the point where they were blaming me and telling me I was sugaring her up because she was so bad for them. The dad wanted me to get her up at 8 and only let her take an hour nap during the day so she would be chilled out at night. After a week, the baby got sick, and I told the mom I wasn't going to do that because she needs sleep. The mom started not letting me leave until the dad was home, so I'd take the eldest to football practice, which was something I wasn't supposed to be doing per our arrangement when I started. There were times I'd stay until 7 when another babysitter would take over for me without them discussing it. One day, 2 weeks before my wedding, the mom was home at 4. The baby was with her dad out of state, so it was just the older two kids. As it got closer to the time when the oldest would need to be at football, the mom asked if I was going to my fiance's apartment because she knew the football practice was on the way and I'd take him. I told her no, that I was going home because my fiance wasn't home. She then said, "Well, just leave as there's no point in you being here any longer." On my way out, she cornered me by the door and said, "I think we need to discuss our arrangement," to which I agreed. She then started going off on me about how awful a nanny I was, saying that I treated her kids horribly. I didn't. I was the only one to speak light into the older two kids, and she's the one who lets her husband cuss at them. She tried to force my hand into quitting, and when I told her that I was actually interviewing for jobs, she fired me. She said that everyone told her I was only there until I got married, then I'd leave. That wasn't the case. She just paid me crap for the hours she expected me to work. Then, about a week later, 1 week before the wedding, my paycheck from them bounced because she withdrew the money from the account my check comes out of, so it wouldn't go through. We ended up having to empty our honeymoon fund to cover this, and I had to pay a fee on that check. Then her husband calls me, 3 days before my wedding, telling me they needed their car seat back after she told me not to bring it back when she fired me. I'm 99% sure she told him I quit. To make matters even worse, the kids were trying to FaceTime me and text me from their iPod and were asking why I didn't say goodbye as they heard the entire thing go down. It's been 2.5 years and I still tear up thinking about that. I was so heartbroken over losing those kids and knowing that there's nobody in that house who is on their side. Story 23. I was participating in a service call that turned out to be the offboarding process for a pretty large corporation as a contract worker, specifically ensuring that certain information security protocols were undertaken during what turned out to be a pretty large-scale firing. The day started normally, except that all keycard access beyond the lobby area was restricted. No explanations were supplied, people started crowding up. None of the security or managerial extensions worked. Management showed up about 50 minutes into this from the front doors with armed security and herded everyone into the cafeteria. The cafeteria doors were subsequently locked. From there, all requests for explanation were declined. People were instructed to sit, and all electronic devices, phones, tablets, laptops, were confiscated and placed into resealable electrostatic bags labeled with the employee's name and identification number, then removed from the cafeteria by security on a cart. Subsequently, individuals were called alphabetically, one at a time, every 5 to 10 minutes from approximately 1000 Est until 1800 Eastish. They were escorted by security into the building. If they were being retained, they were ushered out the back doors, not visible from the cafeteria, instructed to return to work tomorrow morning, and provided with strong legal threat to neither report the firing or attempt to contact co-workers. Security then ensured they left the property. Individuals to be terminated were given an exit interview in an otherwise empty conference room while technicians wiped the electronic devices that were confiscated earlier. There were lots of tears, surprise, and bargaining. Words of comfort like, "You should have performed better," or "Be a man," or grow up were offered by senior management during this process. At one point, an exit interview was paused midway through, and the to-be-terminated employee forced to wait silently at the table, while management grabbed takeout and ate it at another table in the conference room. If they had a phone, they were given a burner phone with a prepaid contract. If they had a tablet or laptop, it was factory reset and returned to them. If no factory reset could be performed, it was retained, and they were informed it would be mailed back to them. All company-issued devices were simply retained without comment or replacement. They were given the same threats vis-a-vis reporting the firing, contacting media, or coworkers, then ushered out the doors via a second exit. Neither visible to the cafeteria area nor the exit retained personnel were ushered out of. They were then shown off the property in the same fashion as everyone else. All in all, the entire office, minus management, got to show up to find the place locked, sit around getting confused and upset for an hour, get herded into a cafeteria where they were essentially detained for 8 hours with no communication or entertainment, with everyone being single file pulled out of the room, never to be seen again. When all was said and done, they had security usher the contractors off-site without sign-off or confirmation of attendance as service provision, and subsequently attempted to duck payment. I almost let it go, as disgusted as I was by what I had been brought on to participate in. But at the end, I was responsible for getting the contract for myself and my colleagues, so I fought it and got us paid a few months down the line. It's pretty high up there in the list of professional moments where I started to wonder if I'd gotten hit by a bus on the way to work and somehow ended up temping in hell. Story 24. Girl I knew was here on work visa. She had been working at a company for several years that treated her well, but ended up moving and got a job at a new one. Her boss apparently used her as a scapegoat, set her up with impossible bullcrap tasks like planning the office Christmas party about a week beforehand, then fired her shortly before Christmas. That meant her work visa expired, and she was going to be sent back to her home country. Apparently, it's the law that the employer in this case pay for the fired employee's plane ride home, and her boss chose to fly her out on Christmas. Story 25. Not quite fired yet, but today, 3 of us publicly confronted our boss over proof of her committing fraud and embezzlement. The organization serves people with mental health conditions, and we confronted her during a public meeting in front of those the organization serves. It was painful. We hated doing it, but the truth needed to come out. Story 26. Girl was a Met user and had a playful nickname, Twitch, among the nursing staff. Problem was, she was a major suck-up to management, so they looked the other way and just called her quirky. Until she twitched so hard she fell out of a chair and ruined a couple of blood samples, delaying a few surgeries. Expensive liability, major public disaster, so a substances test could no longer be avoided. She made a second major scene, fighting over giving one, and security escorted her out of our lives forever. Story 27. I was fired from PetSmart for reasons I can no longer remember. Immediately after the manager delivered the news, she asked me if I would mind staying for 2 hours to wait until the evening shift relief arrived. Unpaid, of course. I laughed in her face and left. Story 28. My sister is 17 and worked at McDonald's for about a month. I was lying on my couch at around 10 on this one night when my sister calls me. The conversation goes kind of like this. Sis, yeah, can you come get me? Me. From work? Didn't you drive? Sis, well, yeah, but can you just come get me? Please, me. Long heaving sigh. Fine. It was only a 5-minute drive, so I didn't even change out of my sports bra and basketball shorts because I assumed I wouldn't be exiting the vehicle. I pull into McDonald's and there's cops in the parking lot with their lights on. My sister's a big smoker, so I immediately assume she got caught with substances. I'm instantly pissed off. I threw my truck in park, jumped out, and marched to my sister who was talking to a cop, while another cop was shoving another McDonald's employee, let's call him Eric, in the back seat. Basically, my sister let Eric sit in her car until his parents came and got him because his car was broken down, and it was still winter at this point. Another McDonald's employee who didn't like Eric saw that he was rolling a blunt in the car while she was on break, so she called the cops. So I look at the cop and ask if my sister is in trouble too. The cop replies that she doesn't believe that my sister is high, so she's fine. But the cop said she can't let my sister drive home regardless, so that's why I had to come and get her. I thank the cop and they leave, and I'm hauling my sister to my truck when the manager of the McDonald's stomps out of the building and starts screaming his head off that my sister and Eric were both fired and banned from McDonald's, and that if they ever stepped foot on the property again, he'd call the cops. Then he looks at me and says, "You too, Dafuk. I didn't even do anything. Whatever. I'll go to Wendy's. At least they get my order right." He also called us trash, so that was pretty cool. My sister cried her eyes out the entire way home and said she'd never break the law again because she was so scared. She got arrested 2 weeks ago for having vodka in her car, so that worked out well. Story 29. I made the horrifically naive mistake of telling a coworker I thought was a decent person. I was putting out feelers after the clinic. I was on probationary period. I'd extended my probationary period for a third time instead of hiring me on. The very next day, I was called into the administrator's office and was ordered to explain why I would be so disloyal. I explained that I had become concerned when they extended my probationary period for a third time, and I was only putting out feelers. The administrator claimed that they had invested a lot of time and money into me, and that I had nothing to worry about. I wasn't going anywhere. So the next day when I was scheduled to have my weekly meeting with the very same administrator, I was feeling quite relaxed and confident. I sat casually in the office and smiled at her when she came in looking all tense. She then proceeded to tell me that I was being let go. When I asked why, "You said I had nothing to worry about yesterday." She just sighed and said, "You just don't seem confident that you're going to get the job." There was a brief moment of me silence, and I said, "You mean you're firing me because I don't seem confident you're not going to fire me?" That's when she got flustered, like visible upset, smacked her hands on the table, and said while shuffling papers nervously, "You know this is a right-to-work state, right?" "Yes." "That means I don't have to give you a reason. They are just letting you go." Then she offered to call security because I guess she thought I was going to be as upset about losing that crap-a-stick job as she was about having to fire me in such a crafty way. I assured her that security was unnecessary and that I would leave quietly. It was embarrassing, bewildering, and obviously quite unethical, but that's living in a right-to-work state for you. Oh, and working in a hospital. Story 30. My mom worked for a small medical practice that was fast on its way to bankruptcy. Her boss gave her a promotion without raise, and over the course of the next year, made her fire her coworkers one by one. She came to realize the reason she was promoted was so her boss could make her do the firing while he avoided everyone. Her coworkers saw what was happening, but still drifted away from their friendships with my mom as they saw her as an accomplice with the boss. The stress of firing her peers and feeling completely isolated at work was really eating away at my mom right up until the day her boss fired her, too. I'm sure there's worse ways to get canned, but my mom is a sweet woman who hadn't yet learned to speak up for herself, and I'm disgusted at the lack of character and integrity her boss had. Story 31. I was in a wreck on New Year's Day of 2009. A drunk driver hit me, injuring my leg up really badly. The driver didn't have insurance, their tags were fake, and their license was suspended at the time of the accident. So I was ducked. I couldn't walk, and my job was being a soda merchandiser. So I was on my feet all day long. After reporting this to my employer, they told me to concentrate on getting well and to report back to management after seeing the doctor after a week or two of rehab. My doctor stated I may have to have surgery and wanted to run some tests. So I called my boss after an appointment. While I was being rolled out of the waiting room in a wheelchair, my boss fired me over the phone. Story 32. Creepy masseur. We had this guy in our depth that got fired within 3 days of starting. On the first day, he had emailed all the females, only the females, and wrote an introduction that resembled an eHarmony profile. Not that bad. By day 2, he was trying to get to know a few select females better. One of them was Lori, who also in my depth and who had a healthy sense of humor. She kind of went with it to see how far this guy would go. He made it known how attracted to Lori he was, and that he would like to give her a full body massage. According to him, he was quite good at giving them. I should mention at this time that Lori was 8 months pregnant. We had a good laugh, but at that point, Lori stopped encouraging the creepy masseur as to not get into any trouble for inappropriate use of company property herself. On day 3, Lori started getting sexually explicit texts. She discreetly let us know that she thought it may be creepy masseur. All of our cell numbers were on a sheet on our boss's desk, which was not hard to get. My coworker, who is not discreet, hears this and loudly announces, "I'll duck and call and find out." Coworker dials, and behind us, you hear the distinct sound of a cell vibrating in someone's pocket. Coworker calls again, brr. Creepy masseur's ears turn red and he has a 1,000-yard stare at his monitor. Lori was a pretty cool chick and could have laughed it off. It was some of us that gave our manager the heads up. Apparently, women in other departments were more disgusted by him and had already complained. Story 33. I've been told I make it really obvious that I don't take crap from people without having to say a word. Got a temp job with the potential for being permanent, and from day one I'm thinking, this store manager hasn't got a clue. She was young and constantly wrapped up in social media and drama. In the 3 months I was there, I saw her argue over the phone on loudspeaker with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, listened to her not being able to decide between said boyfriend and her ex, watched her scream and kick a wall when she realized she wasn't getting her monthly bonus, watched her be unapologetically rude to customers, had customers complain to me about her. I guess my RBF was too hard for me to hide, and she clearly didn't like me. I had a few conversations with trusted colleagues, and at one point said, I bet you they will find a way to make sure I don't stay on permanently. Sure enough, I come back after a day I'd booked off as holiday. Knock on the storefront like, "Hey, can you let me in?" SM opens the door and literally looks at me like I'm a piece of crap and says, "Why are you here?" I'm confused at this point. Did I get the time wrong? Did I get the day wrong? "I'm working today?" I ask. Someone that comes out into the street and tells me I'm not working today because she fired me yesterday and stares at me blankly. She then goes on to tell me that I've been rude with customers, that my performance is low, and that I just didn't turn up for my shift yesterday, the day I'd booked off with her. I've been in retail management. If someone hasn't turned up for their shift, and everyone I know, is straight on the phone to ask where they are. Didn't receive a single phone call. I hadn't heard of a single customer complaint in the 3 months I was there. In fact, I was given gifts from happy customers. My performance was fine according to my targets. Also, this happened the day before I would have been contractually considered permanent. Utterly bewildered, I just walked away. I called the recruitment agency I'd been working for, and they told me I didn't have a leg to stand on, but were sorry for how it was dealt with. Fired in High Street for mystery reasons one day before becoming permanent, in front of a homeless person who was in the doorway next to us. Yes, I'm bitter about it. In case you were wondering, story 34. On night shift, a coworker comes in and tries to log into the computer system. It doesn't work. She's locked out of everything. She'd also had trouble clocking in. The night shift supervisor is off that night. This lady starts freaking out and crying. She says she knew they were looking for a reason to fire her. When were they planning on telling her? What is she supposed to do now? Despite multiple people reassuring her that if they were going to fire her, this is not the way they would do it, and suggesting there might just be a mistake, she is still determined that she's been fired and they forgot to tell her before they cut her access. She goes home and doesn't come in the next night either. She won't answer calls and is out for the rest of the next week. Turns out they hadn't fired her, but they had been looking for a reason to fire her. Not calling and not showing up for work was enough of a reason. So then she really was fired. Story 35. I worked at a place that was sold to investors. They brought in a hotshot CEO to bump up the numbers, then sold to our major competitor. During the transition, about 20 people were let go in one day. The head of HR, M, and the other HR employee, F, spent all day at it. It wasn't easy since a lot of the employees had been there since the early days, 15 plus years. There were tears, some shouting, the awkward, "Hey, Emma, just stand here casually while I make sure you don't get weird while you clean out your desk. Also, I'm so sorry this is happening" thing. After a whole day of that, the head of HR turned to the other HR employee and tells her, "Oh, BTW, we're going to have to let you go too." You may ask, how did I know there were tears, shouting, etc.? Because that skeezy butthole head of HR shared all the gory details with my coworker the next day in our open office workspace. She didn't ask, but he needed to tell someone. To this day, I get mad thinking about it. Story 36. I worked at a chiropractic office once. One of the girls found out she was being fired when she was on Craigslist looking for other jobs and found her job posted for another x-ray technician. She came to work pissed and stripped off her scrubs in front of everyone and walked out in her undies. My hero. Story 37. Got assaulted by someone after work. In defending myself, the guy's car took some minor damage, e.g. wing mirror broken off, maybe a dent in the wing, etc. I thought nothing of it. Went home and then police turned up and arrested me on suspicion of criminal damage and ABH. Was released without charge, but told my boss in work about it just in case. Police had me on bail for like 2 months whilst they checked CCTV evidence, putting me well in the clear due to form. The cockroach who assaulted me started calling my work, trying to get me fired. My boss had my back on it, but about a month later, I got called to a meeting about an hour-and-a-half drive away on a Friday afternoon. This was whilst my boss was on holiday. They made me go through the meeting for nearly an hour before suddenly saying they were going to let me go. Apparently, the grassing had been writing and phoning in every day. Here's the kicker, though. They told me that I was sacked for telling this man to duck off in the process of defending myself. They allowed that I was entitled to defend myself and that I had not been charged with any offense, but said that it was unacceptable to swear in my work's uniform under any circumstances. I had to leave my work vehicle there and was then miles from home and had to take a taxi back costing $80. Luckily, when my boss was back off holiday, he got them to refund me that. Got assaulted in company uniform and in the process of defending myself told attacked to duck off. Was released without charge by police, but sacked for swearing in work's uniform. Story 38. Previous company I worked for got into financial trouble. The month before, I'd been awarded a considerable raise for excellent performance, but they were losing contracts from customers and not much fresh business was coming through the door. Walked into work one day without any indication that anything was wrong. My boss had taken the day off. As it was a Friday, I didn't really think much of it. Next thing I know, my manager requested to see me in the private office. Nothing unusual. We were amidst planning a project, and handed me a letter from my boss to say that I was fired. coward didn't even have the balls to tell me to my face. They reasoned that it was due to unsatisfactory performance, when I had not done anything wrong and, as I said earlier, had previously been awarded a raise for my performance in the company so far. It was because they needed to cut some costs, and because I was the last one through the door, I was first out. By firing me, they were only required to pay me my owed salary and nothing else. Where had I been laid off, there would have been other financial responsibilities, redundancy. So by firing me instead of laying me off, it was cheaper for them. Some of the other guys kept their jobs, but the company has since been liquidated and restarted under a slightly different name. Funny thing is, I still have full access to all of the company and customer systems. They haven't changed any admin passwords since I left. I have full administrator access to primary school computer systems. Good thing I'm not a vindictive E, but that crap is bad. Story 39. Not me, but a very close friend that was working with me at the time. His shift started at 11 p.m., mine started at midnight, and we were both given transportation from door to door, meaning pick up at your house, drop off at the very office every day. Friend was picked up on time and brought to the office as usual, 15 a.m. before his shift started. He was fired on the very spot for some errors he had made that, in my opinion, shouldn't be grounds to fire him, but for a warning and coaching, but whatever. There were clauses in our original hiring contract, so it wasn't appealed. Now comes the bad part. In my country, the last buses run at 11 p.m. for most areas, and even earlier in some others, and he lived 2 cities away. And while firing him, they also revoked his access to the building and the business center where the building was located and was escorted out with no way to get home. And of course, they wouldn't provide transportation as he was no longer an employee. And neither could he wait outside for the buses or even his scheduled morning transport, since by firing him, the system automatically removed him from the travel routes. Couldn't they fire him at the end of his shift, or at least call him and let him know so he would have got to work on his bike? Or at least not showed up to work that day and come in the next morning when there are transportation options and then do the paperwork. It was awful. Story 40. Summoned Teen Lam people, 20% of the entire workforce, to the operations manager's office, 8 a.m. Friday, the day before the company Christmas party where bonuses are handed out, usually to the tune of $2,000 each. 2 weeks before Christmas, no job, no bonus, needing to cancel a date night with their SOS. Morale wasn't too good. 2 months later, another wave of firings occurred. One of the guys was partying in LA the night before and called in sick. They forced his supervisor to call him repeatedly at home, telling him it was mandatory he showed up. He lived 40 minutes away. HR was waiting in the parking lot. Parked, they handed him a packet and check, turned around and drove 40 minutes back home. Story 41. I worked for a small family business from 2007 to 2010. Was the only non-family employee, so I got very close with the owners, their parents, their siblings. Our kids got very close. Eventually, I was close to the whole family. I was invited to family gatherings, holidays, etc. They called me family and treated me like family. I loved all of them. In 2010, I got married to a man whose family had a similar business, and I went to work for my new family. But when the marriage dissolved in 2016, my old boss immediately told me he wanted me back. It was great for about 6 months. Everything was amazing. I was also absolutely killing the whole job. Surpassed every single sales goal. Redid the company marketing quite successfully. Boss's kid even had a key to my house and would stay over all the time. I was completely happy and getting tons of positive feedback. For Christmas, they gave me not only a designer bag, but a nice cash bonus. I had an excellent review too. And then on the morning of 12/31/16, my boss friend called me into his office, told me he couldn't afford the position he had created, and let me go on the spot with zero warning or explanation. I left in tears. 2 hours later, while I was still processing what had happened, a girl I knew called me, crying to say that she had no idea that they were going to fire me to give her my position, for more money, no less. She had zero experience in the industry or with the requirements of the job, and thought it was to have been a surprise for me that she was being hired as my assistant. I still have no idea what happened. I would have done anything for them. Honestly, it broke my heart. When I was supposed to go back to clean out my desk, my boss bailed on meeting me. He sent his brother to do it. I haven't heard one word from them ever since. Story 42. I took a job knowing I was going to have some surgery in the next few months and made sure my boss knew. He was fine with it. Great. The surgery date came up. I went into hospital, but what was meant to be a minor surgery revealed a tumor on the site, and it had to be a major operation with a much longer recovery rate. Emailed boss from hospital, "Yep, no problem, come back when you're ready." Took my full signed-off period at home to recuperate, but did some work remotely, had long phone calls with a colleague to sign off on projects, etc. First morning back, boss said, "Oh, we're changing your job from X to Y, sign this new contract." Okay, read it through, no trouble. 3 hours later, job Y got made redundant. Oh, What a surprise. JobX was advertised in the next day's newspaper, so they'd had it ready to run before I agreed. Boss swore blind that I had never told him about the tumor and had just disappeared for the recuperation period. Told head office that I'd been disruptive and uncooperative when in post, etc. Sadly for him, his deputy was about to resign, and she told head office the truth. I didn't get any statutory compensation, hadn't been in the role long enough, but who did cut me a rather generous check to cover my sick leave and notice, and he got relegated to a much less nice location. The annoying punchline is that a couple of years later, HMRC decided that boss's slapdash approach to payee was not good and stung all the employees and ex-employees for a lot of back tax. We escaped the fines by explaining, but I still had to come up with about 500 at very short notice, thanks to him. Story 43. Well, the worst I've seen while working. At my old job, my boss was very, old-fashioned. I had a coworker who was a very lesbian, so my boss didn't really like her to begin with. Even though I'm also very lesbian, my boss favored me over everyone because I did my work and didn't talk back while he screamed at me, so he was cool with me. Well, my boss notices one day that $20 was missing from the register. He obviously jumps to the conclusion that someone stole it. This $20 went missing on a Wednesday, and on Wednesdays, I'm the only one who works at the store. There are other people there, but they're working at job sites, so they aren't actually at the shop. Boss decides that this is perfect time to fire my coworker. He accuses her of stealing the money. He calls her up on her off day and is screaming at her. Well, she eventually comes up to the store, and they get into an argument that almost gets physical. She keeps mentioning that I was the one who worked that day, not her. After all was said and done, she quit before he could actually fire her. Turns out that no one even stole the money. One of the other workers took it to fill up one of the work trucks with gas and even gave my boss the receipt. He just had a vendetta against this woman, and the only reason anyone could think of was because she was gay. He was really ducked up towards her the whole time she worked there. Story 44. Myself. I was hired as a chef in a brand new bowling restaurant in a casino complex where were 2 bars, bowling, laser tag, private VIP function rooms, a dining area, and the restaurant under one roof. We had many functions lined up for months, and we worked flat out. I was doing 50-hour weeks, and one guy clocked in 72 in 1 week. We would work 12 to 14-hour shifts, and were denied an actual break. Our chefs actively told us there's no breaks because we were busy. Fast forward to Christmas, and it went dead. No functions or customers. We had our shifts cut that week, and my last shift was 7 hours on the day we got paid. The next week, I got a text from my boss saying there's no shifts for me and many employees this week, and there might not be any for the near future. The next week, I texted him if there's any shifts this week and reminded him that I still didn't get paid for the last shift I did. He told me there was none, and that he would look into it and pay out that shift if it wasn't paid, and that it would be paid out next week. I get a payslip in my email the next week to find my annual leave being paid out on grounds of termination. Just like that, I was fired with no warning, and my last shift not paid out after working my ducking arise off the 3 months I was there, with no breaks for the first 2. I texted him saying I got the good news, but where was my pay? To which I got no response. It actually baffles me how heartless people can be and not even have the balls to tell you you're being fired. Story 45. A former colleague of mine said she had some big news to tell me and she'd be in town for a few days and wanted to grab some drinks. We chit-chatted some small talk about how work was going, and I mentioned that I was about to fire a development company we worked with and had already signed a contract with their replacement. I went on and on for a few minutes about how pathetic the former partner's productivity had been and how it had hit rock bottom over the years. Then she told me her big news. She had just accepted a position at the company I was firing the next day, and she was assigned to be my project manager. Needless to say, the rest of the drink meeting was a bit awkward. Story 46. I found out today when I got an email from a client stating, employee was supposed to be here today and won't answer his phone. I make a couple calls only to find out employee was asked to resign and nobody bothered to inform his accounts. I flew out of state to smooth things over. I'm in the hotel lobby right now as this happened today. Story 47. I fired a kid in between bites of my dinner. He had a heart condition, so he claimed he couldn't take trash to the dumpster. This kid could, however, take smoke breaks every time someone took the trash out for him. He was usually the dining room attendant when he worked, a role he'd often requested so he could take 6 or 7 smoke breaks in addition to his scheduled one during his 5-hour shifts. We got to the point where verbal communication wasn't enough, so I started writing him up. I talked with my GM, who agreed that if he wasn't going to work at the expected time, he had to be fired. He was averaging 20-30 minutes per shift smoking on the clock and had 4 shifts a week. On his next write-up, I put down that the next incident would result in termination, and he sniffed as he's seen it. I watched him light up later, then went to eat lunch in the office. When he came back in, I hollered for him. He came in, I gave him his write-up terminating him, and he refused to sign. I noted that and put it in his file, which he promptly tried to grab out of the drawer. I told him it was time to go, and this cute little 17-year-old kid started screaming that his dad was a lawyer and he'd sue me. Screamed all the way out through the dining room, flinging salt and pepper shakers off tables, and threw the lot to his car. Bless his daddy. He made the kid come back in and apologize for being an a-hole. He didn't know his heart-conditioned kid was smoking either until I showed him the write-ups. Story 48. This one is going to be fun. I did a lot of security work as a manager. Some of the sites were just rough. One would just shut your badge off. If you got up and went out to the bathroom and couldn't get back in, you knew you were fired, and they were probably cleaning the desk for you. You just wandered to security in the lobby. They told you that you'd been terminated and to call HR the following day or your agency. We had a work site where everyone had to pass through gates and scan their ID tag before the gates let them in. If the light changed to red, your card didn't read. If blue, it read and the gates opened. If purple, they fired you. You don't even get a phone call. If you hit purple, you go to the security line similar to an airport security check line, turn in your badge and get your box of stuff and a final check. A call center where if it was your turn to be replaced, a police officer walked in with security, tapped you on the shoulder, and escorted you out to your car. The box of stuff was next day shipped to your door. Saw a team meeting where everyone was given a number according to their seats. All odd numbers were fired. A place that hired a huge group of temp labor. They fired the whole agency. Not just the people, but literally said, "Your company sucks, get all your people and leave." About 68 temps gone that morning. All had to be escorted out one by one. One knew why. The list goes on, but isn't corporate life fun? Story 49. I was fired the day after I moved. For weeks, I told everyone about my move and how I was excited to have a nicer place to live. And then Monday at 2 p.m., I was asked to come into the office and was told I'm not a good fit. And they honestly expected me to keep working for 2 weeks after that. So as I'm crying, I reach over to my phone and messaged a friend who told me I was on the hire list for another library to beg for that job. She called me and I answered in the meeting and walked out. She told me, "Dude, no, get out now." So I left with 2 weeks' pay and a job offer from another library. Spoiler, in this new library system, I'm doing really well and just got a promotion. To be clear, my friend knew about how I was treated at that library and was like, "Dude, get out. This library I work at wants to hire you." And I was like, "No, I'll stick it out because I'm stubborn." In retrospect, I should have noticed a lot of the red flags, but I was just happy to be employed. In the end, I'm happy at my current job. I got what I wanted, just not in the way I expected. But seriously, Gitz knew I was signing a lease and moving and said nothing. Ouch. Story 50. My grandfather was in HR at a large bank back in the 70s. One day he got called to the president of the bank's office and given a very specific set of instructions. They handed him a reel-to-reel tape player and told him to go down a couple floors, place the player on the table in a certain conference room, press play, and walk out. Simple enough. Being the good company man he was, he proceeded downstairs and walked into the conference room. When he arrived, he found a group of about 50 people gathered in the conference room, all of whom immediately began asking him what this meeting was about. He told them, honestly, that he had no idea. He placed the player on the table, pressed play, and turned to walk out. As he made his way through the crowd toward the door, he heard an emotionless voice on the tape say, "Attention, blah, 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 division of blah, blah, blah bank. We have arrived at the difficult conclusion that your services will no longer be required. Please clean out your desks and vacate the premises immediately. Human Resources will be in touch to conduct interviews as soon as possible. Thank you for your service." My grandpa told me that some of those people had worked there for 20 years. This was at a time when the American dream usually took the form of working at the same place for 50 years, getting a gold watch, and retiring with your pension. The impersonal nature of letting all of them go like that, without actually talking to any of them, always struck me as pretty awful. Story 51. My boss was an idiot and one of the corporate heads had told him he had to fire somebody. So instead of thinking about who to fire, he waited until Halloween to fire someone. He didn't want to make an unpopular decision. It was during our Halloween party, and he tried to fire our quality assurance guy, but somehow was talked into firing someone else. So this guy got fired on Halloween because our boss didn't want to look stupid and go back to his first decision and fire the first guy. There was a big argument, and our boss even tried to offer him a Chili's coupon. Story 52. One of the stories here reminded me of some crap I went through. I had gotten a job at a convenience store, but was on a probationary period for 30 days. The aura of the store felt weird when I started there, and I tried to ignore it. I couldn't put my finger on it. A couple weeks later, I got another part-time job as an adult recreational sports referee, and the hours would have made it hard for me to do overnights, which coincidentally were the truck nights. The manager didn't like this and got all pissy, accusing me of doing it intentionally, but it was far from the case. Anyway, I get laid off at the end of the month, but I don't know about it because the manager forgot to call me and tell me as much. So I had to drive the 20 minutes there to find out I didn't have a job. I was accused of ignoring a duty of stocking the beer cooler, despite my repeated attempts to tell them the entire month that the alarm, letting me know when people came into the store, rarely worked at night. So I wouldn't stock the cooler for fear of someone stealing crap and running before I could get out there. They also accused me of other crap just to pad the stats, so to speak, making it easier to fire me. It's normal to want to burn that place to the ground and dance in the ashes, right? Story 53. About 10 years ago, I was working at an internal help desk for a large company. One of our duties was to provide password resets for computer user accounts whenever a user had an issue signing in. One day, my coworkers and I in the bullpen started getting more calls than normal from one of our subsidiary brands, all for password resets. We'd go through the procedure, but the reset wouldn't work. I raised the issue to my supervisor to let him know that we were having issues, now about 140 calls into the issue in a 30-minute period, and he went off to see if he could get further details for us. When he came back, he let us know that the company had decided to lay off 500 or so workers, and that we needed to tell all of these employees that they needed to speak with their managers who were also being laid off. All of the user accounts were disabled, preventing the reset from working, though we wouldn't see any error messages. It was the crappiest thing I've ever had to do, and it was one of the most unprofessional things I've ever seen. Story 54. I was one of a group of 13 teachers who were laid off from a struggling private school. The decision had been made to get rid of year 11 and 12 as a cost-cutting measure, so therefore staff had to go. The way we were told if we were being laid off or not was a letter and placed in our pigeonhole by the school principal, who ensured he had left for the day and gone home so none could confront him about it. He also proceeded to hide in his office with the door locked when he did come back to work. We then had to work for another term before we finished for the school year. Story 55. My buddy moved across the country for a job. At the end of his second week, he was informed they were going to let him go as part of a large reduction in force. He had moved all of his stuff and signed a year lease of an apartment. When he complained that this really screwed him over, and the company had to know this was coming well before he started and should have just told him to not come, his now former boss patted him on the back, chuckled, and told him something like, "Life's not fair." My buddy ended up getting the last laugh. His dad's best friend was an attorney with all the right connections in that state. His old company settled with him when they were served with a lawsuit, claiming something like fraud and deception. He ended up settling for something that was over double his yearly salary. Story 56. I was once on vacation when a bunch of people got let go. Workforce reduction based on seniority by department. When I got back, they sent out an email explaining that all the firings were over and everyone reading the email had nothing to worry about. I guess they forgot that they still had to fire the guy that was on vacation, though. After reading the "You're safe" email, I was cleaning out my desk. The post-firing story is even crazier. Immediately after I left, one of my coworkers went to our boss and told her he was finalizing details to take a new job and hadn't broken the news yet. Our department couldn't lose 2 people, so they asked me to come back. This was my dream job at the time, so I tore up the firing paperwork, came back and worked there for another 8 years, including a promotion, and then left on my own terms when I landed a dreamier dream job. In the end, me getting fired was me spending a few days at home with full pay. Story 57. This happened to me. I had my 90-day review and everything went well. Got excellent scores across the board. Boss asked if I had anything I wanted to talk about, and I brought up a few issues I had that I thought we should work on if that position was to be a long-term one. These were things like communication between he and myself, weekend calls, etc. I wasn't leaving, I just wanted to work on things to make sure I didn't wind up rage quitting. The next day, his wife comes into the office. I don't work for her, she runs a sister company, but she's the boss's wife. We discussed the same things my boss and I discussed. A while later, I start getting emails replying to a Craigslist ad for my job. My boss comes in the next day pissed at me. His wife told him I quit. I wasn't even going to argue. That made it clear it wasn't an environment I wanted to be a part of. Story 58. One of the guys from security got fired for beating a customer who wasn't behaving. I work at a big retail store in Amsterdam. A lot of drunk people come here during the night. Security was necessary. Guy tried to fight a security personnel who is 6'8" and weighs 330 lbs. Knows MMA. Security guards slapped him once, and the guy flew across the room. Of course, when you are drunk, sometimes your brain can be very stubborn. He wanted some more. The security guard threw the fully grown man like he was a toddler, severely injuring him. The guy could barely walk. Luckily, the video didn't get leaked or else it would be all over the internet. He got fired because they couldn't control the guy. He could take on the entire store and we still had no chance. His methods of keeping out the terrible customers is way too risky, as everyone has a camera these days. Story 59. My mom used to be a florist. She wasn't the official manager. Her boss gave the job to her friend instead, despite her being incompetent. But she was the one who took care of everything a manager should have been doing. She was running that shop. And then my entire family decided to up sticks and move to Ireland together. When my mom told her boss that she'd be leaving, and she gave plenty of notice, her boss first told her that she had to stay in England for her job. When my mom refused, because of course she did, her boss then became very hostile. She refused to just straight up fire my mom though. She wanted her to quit so that she wouldn't get any benefits from the government during the months we had left living in England. My mom wouldn't quit because she couldn't afford to live on nothing for 3 months. Her boss hired her replacement while she was still working there and went on and on about how she couldn't afford to have my mom and the new girl working there. My mom still wouldn't quit. So eventually her boss resorted to physical intimidation to force her out of the shop. Still didn't just fire her. My mom finally quit. Story 60. Crazy lady from the restaurant I work at was found by another server passed out, forehead on the steering wheel 45 minutes after her shift was over, and later found out she OD'd on substances. She was already on thin ice for getting caught buying substances during her shift. She was taken away by the police who said, if we didn't report this, she most likely would have passed. There was also a cook who during his shift just disappeared and only later found out he left because of some problem with his friend, buying substances and getting revenge against his girlfriend. Story 61. Not fired, but laid off. The company was restructuring, and from what I was told by a few people I was friendly with in the other office, there were some inside salespeople in another office location for my company that literally came in, were taken into a room to told they were being let go, and escorted out of the building. It was all secondhand information, so there might have been exaggerations, but I don't think there was too much hyperbole. There were people that were on holiday that came in after everybody else got the announcement and were literally blindsided. It was shocking. They did get paid for the remainder of their notice period, but I honestly could not believe they could do that. As a lot of these people were really good people and good workers, maybe they didn't kiss as much ass as other people in the industry who seemed to rise up the ranks quickly with no actual experience. But they were good at their job. Other people, they just moved around and pretty much made them so miserable that they were forced to find a job elsewhere and quit. One thing I learned moving to the UK from the US is that it's a lot harder to fire somebody here, even if they are a poor worker. Story 62. Headed out with family to celebrate at a Christmas Eve service. Phone dinged because I inadvertently got copied on an email from my boss to an office assistant, directing her to draft up a letter terminating me for cause, starting with the unsatisfactory job I did painting the entire new office on my own time when I started the job as an associate attorney 1 year prior. I immediately called him to ask, what the heck? He responded that he couldn't talk because he was in a church service with his family. Story 63. I was walking into work and saw my coworker friend being walked out by the cops. He stole money from the store and was caught. A week later, I was at a different store. Turns out that kid got a job from that store also. He was getting walked out by the cops again for the same thing. It was unreal. Story 64. A girl at my job worked the graveyard shift, went to the bar on her lunch and got drunk, came back and started taking off her clothes and lit up a cigarette in the building. A group of people went and hotboxed their car on lunch and came back inside reeking of substances. All but one got fired because her substances test came back clean. A supervisor and her boss were sneaking into the building after hours and having sex in the training room. They were not aware that there were cameras in there. Story 65. I'm hoping to get fired today, actually. My job is freelance consultancy, so my boss puts me at companies and he does all the financial stuff. I'm just a programmer. I go somewhere, type code, boss gets paid, he pays me. It's only my second week at my current assignment. I haven't been given a team. The projects they gave me don't work. Nobody knows how to make them work. There's no backlog with actual work, but the coffee is all right. I'm bored as duck, frustrated and going to work with very strong feelings wanting to turn around and go home. I hate being here with a passion. I'm just here today because I demanded the lead dude to sit down with me for a chat. I hope he realizes there is no work for me and they can do without me. My actual boss already stated he's with me 100%. There are other jobs that do have things to do. I'm not even motivated to try anymore because the non-working projects are incredibly bad, code-wise, architecturally, largely untested, no quality control. I just wish I knew how to get fired whilst being professional. Story 66. Thanksgiving week. We were all called into a team meeting and told our jobs were done in 2 weeks. For those that don't know, Thanksgiving is what kicks off the Christmas season in the US. So everyone lost their jobs 2 weeks before Christmas. I was one of the lucky ones. Since I was in the IT department, they asked me to stay on until the end of the year to help pack things up. As it transpired, I got a new job almost immediately, and my district manager, who thought the layoff was bullcrap too, just kept signing my time cards to say I'd work. Ended up getting paid until the end of January for doing nothing but signing off saying I was showing up. He let me keep my corporate laptop too. Oh, I thought you told me it was broken. I already entered that into inventory, so I guess you can throw it out. He was a cool guy. I used the laptop for several years afterwards. The silver lining is about 6 months later, a new company took over the building and ended up hiring most of the staff from my company. Story 67. This guy I know got a bad performance review that most of us felt was undeserved. He did his job and worked well with everyone. When he went to talk to the boss about it a few days later, just to ask, what can I do better? What am I not doing right? The boss said, I was actually just waiting to find a replacement because we are firing you. He wasn't even going to say anything until a new person was hired. It was a real idiot move on that boss's part. We're in a state where you can be fired with no reason given, so he was crap out of luck. Story 68. Our old manager was forced by her boss to fire a guy who was a bit slower than the other servers because he stood up for himself when someone called him retarded. He has autism. Story 69. This happened to me. Best job I ever had. First job I ever had. My boss had left and I went for her position, along with another coworker who was only there 6 months to my 4 years. They gave the job to her. I lasted a month. She got me fired for a no call, no show, except that I had switched days with her approval with another coworker. But that schedule just happened to go missing. Nor was I called to ask why I hadn't come in on the day in question. I reapplied after she was fired a year later and was hired on the spot. Super excited, I sat and watched 6 hours of tapes on HIPAA and stuff. After I was done, someone from corporate saw me, and within minutes I was fired. Turns out, the lady who got me fired in the first place had lied and said I was having sex while working. Forever blacklisted from that facility. That was in 2008, and I'm still ducking bitter about it. Story 70. I got notice while on holiday, the day before I was supposed to fly back. I ended up just not getting the plane back and living in Holiday City with a new job. 2 weeks later, so it didn't all end badly. Story 71. Guy that was a server at another restaurant kept dining in at our restaurant. He kept saying for a few months that he was going to quit and apply to work with us instead. Finally, he does, and on his first day, maybe an hour into his shift, he goes and smokes weed in the bathroom while we're in the middle of a major inspection. He was fired and sent home, but he came back the next day thinking he was just fired for the day. No, dude, how stupid can someone possibly be? Maybe this is more of the dumbest reason I've known someone to get fired rather than the worst way. Didn't put much thought until I read the question again, however my contribution stays. Also remove the names of the restaurants as this was recent, and I still work there. Story 72. The computers in our ambulances are a little particular sometimes, and we always joke that we've been fired when a login doesn't work. Well, one day I could not get my login to work. Checked my email, lo and behold, I'd been fired. At the end of the day, it was what amounted to be a clerical misunderstanding. But so far, it's taken almost a year to get it sorted. Story 73. This happened literally 2 days ago. I took May 4th, 9th off for my wedding, which was May 6th. Afternoon of the 9th, I get onto my work laptop to initiate the name, insurance, banking, and account changes associated with my marriage, and name change. While on, I get a farewell/so sorry, so shocked Skype from a coworker. Most of my small company works remote. We use Skype for internet communication. After much freaking out and calls to every boss corporate head we have, small company, currently in between HR people, I find that they have laid off about 10 people due to restructuring and financial reasons. And someone jumped the gun and announced those names at an impromptu all-hands meeting before ensuring everyone on said list had been properly informed. So I was let go 3 days after my wedding, before I even came back from my PTO, and was informed by a now mortified coworker who was informed before I was. Story 74. I had a summer job working in a flour mill to help me pay my way through college. Midway through my 3rd or 4th summer in the job, the plant manager came up to me and fired me on the spot. I didn't understand and asked my actual manager about why I was fired. He responded, "Ignore it. Come to work tomorrow." It turned out the recently fired plant manager hated college boys because he never went to college, so tried to fire all of us on his way out. Story 75. My previous and mentally unhinged boss loved to fire people. This one has always been my fondest memory of her. She called in 8 security guards to escort a guy out through the entire office just so she could humiliate him in front of the entire office. He wasn't having it, so she started yelling, "He's been fired. He is dead." So he pulls out his camera and starts recording and laughing at her over the top performance. She then yells in an ear-splitting, shrill voice, "Are you recording this?" and points at the elevators. The guards took him downstairs and saw him out. We all went out for drinks the next day. She didn't get fired until 6 months later for a totally unrelated incident when she locked a lady in a staircase on the 16th floor and told her to run down if she wanted to keep her job. Story 76. A group of 5 people, including myself, were fired from a call center because they'd lost the contract for the particular duty we were trained for, support for a specific phone manufacturer. They called us into a room and did a mass firing, which I found highly unprofessional. We were let go first because we were still on the 3-month probationary contract, so they could give us 2 weeks' notice. However, as soon as we got out, we told the other members of the team doing that support, about 15 people, and they immediately just stopped giving a duck. Phone rings, pick up, put down. Just sat at their desks chatting with each other. Why bother? They're gonna get fired anyway. My supervisor was in tears because I'd been trained to support another client of the call center company, and they refused to transfer me to that division. Oh well. Shrug, story 77. I have two. First wasn't a coworker, but a culinary teacher. He was working at a resort kitchen when he and a fellow head chef noticed they were going through a shocking amount of vanilla extract in a short amount of time. I'm talking full liter bottles in less than a week. They do some digging only to find out that one of the line cooks would take the vanilla extract into the bathroom and drink it in an attempt to get buzzed. Second one was when the head pastry chef at my restaurant found one of my fellow line cooks drinking the wine we use for cooking. Yeah, those in the culinary industry have some of the highest amount of alcoholics abusers. Story 78. This is the thing I don't understand about the US, how people can just be fired like that. Don't you have any kind of employment laws? You can't just be fired in the UK unless it's gross misconduct. For example, I worked at a toy shop once where a guy was just handing video games consoles out to his friends. One day, the coppers just marched in and nicked him, and thus he was then dismissed. But otherwise, everything else has to be done by ways of a number of verbal and/or written warning, and then eventually you can dismiss. And even then, the employee can take it to tribunal if they feel and can prove it was unfair dismissal. Either that or you can be made redundant, and that has to be because your job role is no longer required. Thus, they can't hire anyone else for it. And then you can get a redundancy payout. Story 79. On the 2 occasions my wife told me she was pregnant, I had been terminated with notice the same day. In both situations, I was able to ride out a crest of terminations and stay useful enough to be kept on and have those terminations revoked. But now I live in a constant state of fear that if I ever get fired, we will be welcoming baby Oopsie in about 8 months. Also, about 15 years ago, I had a doofus boss come up to our order desk and with delight declare, "I just fired a summer help student over email. That's the first time I've ever done that." No kidding. Within about 10 minutes of that, another summer help employee quit by fax, which again was something had never happened until then. I spent the rest of the day hoping we'd get another termination or resignation by smoke signal, but alas. Story 80. I used to work for a very big telecommunications company here in the UK. We were told the company was about to receive a shakeup, and slackers would be fired. Sure enough, a day or two later, the one guy in our team who got the least work done was called into a meeting in the middle of the day, and when he returned to his desk, it was to collect his things and be walked out the building. Our office was open plan with 100 people all at their desks, watching. I sat next to him. He simply looked at me and said, "I've been let go," picked up his stuff and left. They did it 1 or 2 other people that day too. No warning, no notice period if these people had kids or responsibilities, or if they received a month's salary for the inconvenience. It was a tough day. What's the craziest reason you had to fire someone? Story 1. We had someone fall asleep at his desk with a lit cigarette in his hand. In an office full of cubicles like maybe 6-7 years ago, smoking wasn't legal anywhere. Indoors, let alone in an office building, LMAO. And the first time he wasn't even fired. He was fired when it happened again. Story 2. Once I had a guy call in sick to his restaurant bar shift right before his shift, and then proceeded to show up crap-faced drunk for happy hour during the time he was supposed to be working. He was not a bright man. To clarify, with this guy, it was not an isolated incident. Mental health days are totally legit. Just don't come to work for happy hour crap-faced. Restaurant life be wild on so many levels. Story 3. Years ago, at a lumber company, had a guy, less than 2 hours after he started on his first day, picked up his car with a forklift and stand underneath it to see what was rattling when he drove. Story 4. Not me, but my dad. He has a small handyman company with less than a handful of employees. His tools somehow have the habit of growing legs when he's at construction sites, so he rigorously writes his name on everything with permanent marker. One day, shortly after he hired someone new, his folding ruler is missing. He asks around if anyone has seen his folding ruler, but that doesn't seem to be the case. He doesn't think much of it. Sometimes things get lost. The next day, he sees the new hire with a familiar-looking folding ruler. He asks him to see it. New hire refuses. Dad tells him that he's his boss and insists he shows him the ruler. He complies under pressure. Sure enough, there's my dad's name on it in capital and bold letters. Now, that could have been an honest mistake, and there probably wouldn't have been any repercussions if he simply said, "Oh, my bad. Must have put the wrong one in my pocket. Here's your ruler." But the new hire insisted that this was his ruler. and that the name on the side of it wasn't my dad's handwriting, but rather a note the new hire had written on it himself to remember my dad's name. What makes it even more stupid is that my dad's company pays for the tools of his employees. He could have simply asked for a folding ruler and my dad would have given him one for free, but no. He needs to steal the boss's folding ruler and give the stupidest lie imaginable as an excuse. I really hoped I wouldn't have to deal with a "your dad fires people for taking 3-0 tools" comment, but as it came up and is far down the comment chain, I'm going to put it here in case somebody else also feels the need to address this. If you're working in handcraft, you probably already know about the special importance of your tools. It's also very much about trust. An employee of my dad will be unsupervised in strangers' homes at points. Showing such a disregard for other people's property doesn't pair too well with that. My dad is very trusting of his employees and former employees. He frequently lends tools and cars to his employees for their private projects like moving. He has also helped plenty of former employees to start their own business, and when they do so, he'll let them still come by and use the special machinery he's collected over the years, to which new businesses usually don't have an access to. So, if you're still not convinced that this isn't a show of power, kindly duck off. Story 5, not too crazy, more stupid than crazy. One of the programmers on my team was sitting at his desk looking at adult film. And this is cubicle land, no offices. My director walked into the area to talk to me and saw it. Then it was the first thing he told me about. So I got up and walked over for a look myself, and there it was. The director and I looked at each and I said, I gotta take care of this. So we walked back to HR. I told them what was going on and what we saw, and they told me to fire him. So I did. He lost a $110K job for looking at adult film on his computer at work. Story 6. Had to fire a guy for coming to work high on meth and getting lost in a closet while painting it. Asked what the deal was and was told, shh, I'm having a conversation. That was his last day, LMAO Story 7. I work at an art studio where we teach classes and sell pottery that our artists make for others to paint. I'm one of the artists and the manager. I started getting a funny feeling about one of my employees. She wasn't doing anything blatantly wrong, just seemed to work really slowly sometimes. Request insignificant but kind of odd schedule changes, and have different break habits from the other staff. I started feeling like she was stealing, but this is a really small business, so I didn't have her on camera or any way to really prove it, until she accidentally sent me a video of herself painting pieces that I made from her home. Story 8. I worked at a retail store and found one of my co-workers using the company iPad that we used to play music and order lunches to go on Craigslist and search for hookups. She didn't even bother to delete the search history. Story 9. I worked at a pet store and was the lead cashier, so I had to train this girl who didn't think she had to abide by the uniform because it's just store name and doesn't count as a real job. That was a warning that despite her thinking she did need to follow the uniform rules. Then when ringing up customers, she actually told customers they couldn't buy certain items because we were running low and she planned on getting a pet soon and wanted these items. I apologized and rung them up. Second warning, with me explaining how that's not how it works, and she could shop when she's off the clock. Finally, my manager fired her when she tried to steal one of the cats that were up for adoption, after being told she needed to wait for approval after they do a home visit and make sure she can care for the cat. Her excuse for trying to steal the cat? Her landlord doesn't allow pets, so she wouldn't be approved, and she'd be a much better pet parent than anyone else who wanted the cat, and much better than any of the customers we got. The girl didn't even last a week. Story 10. Fired a guy for looking to pay someone to cast black magic on the owner and the owner's family to bewitch them into giving him a raise, and ironically never firing him. Only reason I found out was because he asked someone else in the office for help in finding a witch doctor to cast the spells and word got round. No one wanted to be in the same room as him after that. When I confronted him, he said the devil made him do it, so it wasn't his fault. I live in the Middle East. I definitely did not wake up expecting to fire someone for black magic that day. Story 11. A guy shaved, trimmed off his hair, and left them scattered across a shared desk in a shared office. When confronted, he pulled a George Costanza. Oh, is that frowned upon? Story 12. I was a bartender, bar manager. This guy came in one night and said he was an aspiring DJ and asked if we would consider hiring him to come in just on Sunday nights to DJ for us. He said we wouldn't have to pay him at first. He would just take tips and we could renegotiate after he helped to build up our Sunday night crowd. He lasted less than 3 months. He drove away so much business, and I got so many complaints. He played the same songs every week, and when people made requests for commonly known songs, he had no idea who the musicians were. I had to fire someone who was working for free. He was a nice guy, which is the only reason he lasted as long as he did. Story 13. My coworker at a coffee shop. 1. Told a customer she didn't feel like making X drink and she should go elsewhere. 2. Wore Cookie Monster PJ pants while we had a very strict black or khaki pants, no jeans, no leggings policy at the time. 3. Couldn't figure out the concept of milk. This still baffles me to this day. Like I was trying to show her how to steam milk properly. She was off in LA La Land, and when she snapped back into the conversation asking, "What are we doing again?" followed by me reminding her, and she quite literally asked what was in the gallon jug that I poured into the metal pitcher. I told her it was milk, and she just looked at me, her eyes saying she was there for 2 days. Location was a certain green and white cup establishment in Oklahoma. Lots of substances are around the area. Not Tiger King area, though. She may have been stoned out of her mind. There's no telling with the area. The school systems have really failed the less than genius population. Story 14. I am a chef at an upscale restaurant. The sauté cook has a lobster dish on his station that involves a technique called deglazing that involves alcohol, so in turn the pan catches on fire briefly and flames up. When you do it correctly, hard to do it incorrect, the alcohol is cooked off and the flame goes out. Every time he made this dish, he would deglaze the pan, catch it on fire, and then blow it out, blowing his own germs and nastiness all over someone's food and everything in the blast radius. That was a week ago. Fired him after he did it multiple times after being asked not to. Maybe it's because of the current state of affairs, but I couldn't believe a trained cook would do that. Story 15. Not my personal experience, but one fellow contractor had a safety guy for 6 months. One weekend, he took a trip out of town for non-work related reason, but used the company truck and charged it all on the company credit card. On his way up there, he ran a random person off the road, who just so happened to be one of the owners of another contractor who works closely with the one who employed this guy. Shortly after he was fired, and I'm sure criminal charges were being brought against him. A couple weeks later, his wife calls his former employer saying he had called her randomly and ended his life in his truck on the side of the highway. Me and another colleague went searching for records of this guy, couldn't find anything. No claims of a died in the local paper where he supposedly hit himself. Thought it was weird, but whatever. It turns out this guy falsified all his qualifications and job experience. Fast forward a month later, and I heard through the divine that the original contractor who had employed this guy received a call from some contractors across country because he applied for work there and put them down as his previous employer. He faked his own death to get out of trouble with the company, then proceeded to put them down on his resume, not expecting anyone to check his references. Story 16. The guy had somehow hung on by the skin of his teeth when caught making plastic model funny cars at his desk. Pro tip: throwing a newspaper over the model doesn't hide the smell of the glue, but when a client called complaining about our hero trying to sell him golf clubs out of the trunk of his car, he was gone. Story 17. Harassment. He harassed virtually every person in the department. Human resources put up a fight while I had people crying and quitting because of him. Story 18. I work construction, and one of the subs gave me an invoice with no receipts. Turns out he wanted $30K for 4 weeks of work without paying the companies he rented equipment dumpsters from. I paid off the companies he owed money to and told him to duck off. Story 19. 1. He said, "My ex-wife died and there's no one to take care of our kids. Needed a week off to sort everything out. Ex called to talk to him. Boom." 2. One of the guys went to lunch with short hair and came back with a ponytail down to his ass. Identical twins that were sharing the job. All the guys knew and thought it was funny. Yikes. Story 20. In the early 2000s, I managed a coffee shop that required the customers' names to be put on the cup. One guy looked like he was doing it, but upon closer inspection on some cups, he was writing an IP address. It turns out he was running an illegal sports book out of the shop. He did quit before I had to technically fire him because he found out I knew. Story 21. Plumber. My helper and I went to do a punch list at a new home. When the very attractive 20-something-year-old answered the door, I asked what the problem was, and she said, "When I take a shower, the shower head makes a whistling noise." My helper said, "Hell, if I saw you naked, I'd whistle too," she complained to the super. I had no choice but to fire him. Story 22. My assistant manager announced to a female coworker that he had officially named both of her boobs. After working with her for 3 years, this was the second time he had said something hot to her within a week and had to be let go. He still lived with his ailing parents. I didn't know who to be sorry for the most. Story 23. When I was working at Burger King, our restaurant manager was away on maternity leave, so we had someone from another store come in over that time to fill the role. He ended up hiring someone who had worked there 5 to 6 years previously. High turnover, so a lot of hiring, leaving. The few staff that had known her before she'd left hated her, but had no idea why she left. She even passed all the checks from head office before she was hired. Restaurant manager comes back about a month after she's been hired, takes one look at her, and rages. Like my rum is yelling at this girl. She's yelling at the manager that hired her and all the crew that had known her when she was here last. Obviously, none of us knew what was going on, but it turns out this girl hadn't left. She'd been fired, and management at the time hadn't told anyone that, just that she'd quit. This girl had scammed Bach by pretending to be pregnant. Fake ultrasounds, plans, baby shower, the whole lot. And then took paid maternity leave so she could go work somewhere else because it was seasonal work with better pay, with the idea of having a job for the off-season to come back to. I have no idea how she got through the head office checks, but she was fired that day. Super impressive when you consider that I'm in New Zealand, so getting fired is usually a month-plus long process here. Story 24. Had a food and beverage manager that brought a coffee into his female assistant manager on inventory day, when the two of them would be alone performing inventory. She drank about half the coffee, started feeling dizzy, and saw there was a heavy table pushed up against the door. She freaked out and got out of the area. She went to HR and they tested the coffee and it was roofied. Definitely the most interesting firing I was involved in. Story 25. Might not be the craziest, but when I was working in fast food Subway, I had to fire a guy for assaulting a customer. He had a bad temper. He threw the tuna scoop at a particularly difficult Karen. I had to request the customer to not press charges. Story 26. I used to work at a hotel near an airport, so pretty much guaranteed business. The housekeeping supervisor was a straight-up jackass, putting a housekeeper in the smoking section on purpose, refusing to resupply, and even stealing from one housekeeper for having the audacity to ask for a schedule change, berating and laughing at another employee battling obvious mental health issues, etc. She even let her adult stepdaughter move into rooms listed as vacant without paying for them. For what reason, nobody knows. What finally got her ass fired? A former employee making a social media post describing all of it. The day she got crap canned, everybody celebrated. One of the housekeepers even started singing. Story 27. He worked at the company for 2 weeks, came to the Christmas party on Friday, got crap-faced, told the HR manager that she was an escort and would pass alone. They had some previous vaguely romantic history, went on a couple of dates or something. Tried to fight 2 of the customer service managers, who asked him to calm down. And while being escorted out, he turned to the CEO and COO and told them to go duck themselves. He showed up to work on the Monday talking about how fun the party was and how he had seen some people who would probably be called into HR that morning. He was the first and only employee to be called and was sacked on the spot. Story 28. Had an employee that was going to get fired for simply showing up late constantly with no legit reason. During the term meeting, she tells me another employee cut the brake lines in her car. It's obvious this was to save her from being fired. She didn't realize that something like that gets cops involved. She was termed, and then detectives showed up to her house to get statements. Of course, no evidence of lines being cut, and now she's dealing with police for making false statements. Story 29. A guy was hired at the metal fab shop I was working at. He had been laid off when we were slow. He was rehired on a Friday, starting Monday. Goes and does his substances test first thing. He failed. Apparently, he had celebrated being rehired over the weekend. It was funny listening to my boss say, "Are you kidding me? You knew our testing policy. You couldn't wait 3 days?" Story 30. When I was a bank teller, a fellow teller got fired for stuffing her purse with a strap of 100 Ds every day. 10,000. Here's the interesting part. She's always put the strap back into her teller drawer at the end of the day. She did this for months and months, apparently without anyone noticing. But when the camera auditors finally did catch it, she was confronted and fired. When they asked her why she put a strap of money in her purse each day, but always put it back, she said that if the bank were ever robbed, then she could just take the money home, because everybody would have assumed it was taken by the robber. Story 31. I didn't do the firing, but the company I worked for was growing rapidly and needed people quickly. So they weren't too picky in who they hired. They hired this one guy, Rick, who was kind of strange. Seemed harmless enough, but he was just kind of weird and socially awkward. He started off okay, but after a couple of months, his work started trailing off. His supervisor spoke to him to find out why, thinking maybe something at home was going on or there was some other issue. Rick said all was okay and left it at that. However, there was no change in his work. Long story short, the land guys started looking into his computer usage and found that he was trying to log into adult sites at work all day long and being repeatedly thwarted by the firewall. Then he started doing searches on how to get around the firewall, then tried getting around the firewall, and then tried logging into these sites again. He did all of this on his work-issued computer on the company's network on company time. Yes, after that all came to light, he was quickly shown the door for misuse of company property. Looking back, I kind of feel sorry for him. I'm guessing he was either just that stupid or battling some kind of adult film addiction if he couldn't abstain for 40 hours per week. Story 32. She didn't show up for her first shift, then tried to blame us for it, then refused to turn in her uniform and key First shift. What the hell, lady? Okay, first solo shift. She showed up for the 2 training shifts before that, but still, I can't believe it. Story 33. It wasn't me that fired him, but my dad. My parents owned a cafe and had just hired a new employee on his first training shift. My mom had introduced herself as the boss. Although my dad owns the business, my mom is just as much one of the bosses. My mom is British and my dad is Spanish. My dad was working in the back kitchen. He was main chef. And my mom was teaching the guy the table numbers and introducing staff. When she explained that some of the kitchen staff hadn't got really strong English skills, the bloke went off on one, saying, "Well, I am glad you are finally giving the British a chance. Foreigners that come to Britain need to speak English, or they should be deported immediately." My dad steps in, explains that he moved to this country without knowing a word of English and built his business up from nothing, and now speaks 5 languages, much more than this British guy that could only speak English. My dad explains everyone should be given a chance, but that this British guy had blown his to work at my dad's established. He fired him on the spot and banned him from coming back. He was replaced by an Italian lady that my dad speaks to on occasion in Italian just to brush up his language skills. For reference, he speaks in order of learning Galician, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and English. He has been living in England for 46 years now. Story 34. A guy told a female coworker he wanted to take her newborn baby home with him to inspire his wife to have one. Dude was creepy as duck before that, but the complaint she made to management was what got him cut loose. He denied ever having said it, despite corroborating statements from other employees and a couple customers. Story 35. One guy regularly called in saying that he was hungover due to company drinks. However, I was the one paying for those drinks, and he had, at most, 2 pints of beer prior to leaving any of these events. Another person called our CISO Kim Jong-un when said CISO was asking about scans and patching, and this was after multiple formal warnings of similar crap. Yet another person decided they were going to repatch everything in the comms room without notice, not test their work, and not be in the office the following morning. My favorite was the genius who decided that we're taking that server out of production in 6 weeks, translated to them being allowed to turn the box in question off, remove it from the data center, put it in the back of their car, sell it to their friend, and then hand over copies of software we'd written, so said friend could run a horoscope service. As a wonderful colleague of mine has said, "Where the duck do we find these people?" Story 36. Had to fire my own brother from our distribution company. Really was not easy and definitely caused family fights. He had been using our products so much so that we lost half our stock. To be fair, he got over it in about half an hour. We were 7 and 5 selling candy to fundraise. Story 37. Around 2005-06, worked in a supermarket. An extremely irate, and in this case, fully understandably customer, returned a 5-liter tub of ice cream that she had a face imprinted in it. Unfortunately, the perpetrator had extremely unique features and a large nose and chin, and yep, it looked exactly like our staff member. He had cracked the lid of an ice cream tub, imprinted his face in it, and then somehow managed to get the lid back on tight enough for no one to notice, and somebody purchased it. Not gonna lie, I did giggle at the sheer audacity of it, but still had to fire him. He denied it. It's literally your face in the ice cream, man. To this day, I still think about it, and am just a tiny bit disappointed when I open an ice cream tub, and it doesn't have a face imprinted in it. I hope the customer didn't get any mild PTSD and can open ice cream tubs with confidence nowadays. Story 38, I was a florist and had a 40-something woman delivering for me. I received a call from the building manager of a brand new office building with only one tenant, telling me my driver wrote on the elevator wall with a Sharpie. They had video showing that she was the only person to use the elevator during the time the vandalism took place. The worst part for me was, this happened a few days before Valentine's Day. Story 39. The saddest was a lady that smelled like alcohol pretty frequently. I don't think she was drunk on the job, maybe some shots done at lunch combined with sweating out the prior night. But the other members of the team started to complain about it, and it was becoming disruptive. Story 40. He was outside smoking, illegal in my state, during the dinner rush. He was also sharing it with another employee that was there on a work program from a special needs house. It was just so stupid. We didn't substances test. He could smoke at home all he wanted. Just don't do it at work. Story 41. Okay, this is my cousin's story. He worked as an electrician. He and a coworker were running some data cables in an office. An attractive young female office worker got up from her chair and left the room while coworker was working in her office. When she returned, she found the electrician intently sniffing the seat of her chair. She complained, and the guy got canned. Story 42. I didn't fire them, but someone got fired for having a back of 0.3 at work. She had stolen boxed wine from the grocery store, where she was a pharmacist, hid the wine in the bathroom trash can, took many bathroom trips, and was caught on a fluke because a higher-up came to wish a tech good luck on their last day of work. Her keys were taken away. Somehow, she took her pants off and was prancing around the waiting room in her underwear and with pants on. Escaped to a nearby Starbucks when asset protection came by to scoop her up to be fired. Saddest part was that she turned out to be pregnant during this and was facing a divorce. Something finally cracked, I guess. Story 43. Once had to fire someone from a testing job because they were live streaming the unannounced game with their phone right in the lab in front of everyone after signing their NDAs. More than fired, really. They are ducked for life. Story 44. The one that always boggled my mind was the guy who wore a hat to his shift that had a large logo from a competing brand. I told him to take it off and he complied while whining, "But my hair is awful today." I told him he could buy one of ours or he could go home. A few minutes later, he was wearing it again. I had the handbook at the ready and pointed out that he was violating policy and I would be writing him up. HR would have been proud. He huffed and went back to the break room, but when he emerged onto the sales floor, he had his hat on again. I told him to go home. He threw a couple of obscenities at me, there were witnesses, and slinked out of the store. I put the paperwork together and was ready to fire him in person, but he never showed up to another shift. He was a strange guy, but this was just idiocy that caught me off guard. Strangely topical because he was the first guy I'd known who regularly wore a face mask as a fashion accessory. LA streetwear, circa 2017. Story 45. Dude, I worked with badly photoshopped the face of a 40s-something that also worked there onto the body of some online hot photo. He then proceeded to show it around to the other female workers like, "Look what Woman 101 sent me, you should send me stuff too." This was while he would continually brag about the girlfriend he had at home. He got fired, then dumped by his girlfriend, and kicked out of their apartment. Story 46. A client is complaining about his groin area, repeating it doesn't look right. A male carer checks for any signs of infection, injury, or discrepancies, finds none, and reassures the client. The client comes back later and tells the carer once again, something is not right. So the carer, in his infinite wisdom, undid his trousers, exposed himself to the client, and said, "There's nothing wrong. It looks just like mine." Story 47. Not me personally, but my friend knows a guy he used to work with that got fired from a fast food joint for spitting in 2 hamburgers that were going to be served to his ex-wife and her new husband. So the story goes, the guy's ex-wife with her new husband walked in and ordered a burger. The ex-wife happened to see her former husband making the hamburgers in the back of the restaurant. The guy noticed his ex-wife was there and looked very jealous when her husband emerged too. They were smiling at each other, which apparently made the guy very angry. He was apparently abusive to his ex-wife. They got their order a few minutes later and left the restaurant. The husband, however, then had a gut feeling that the guy had messed with the burgers. So he opened the burgers to check, and indeed the guy had spat in the burgers. He marched back into the restaurant and demanded to see the manager, and pointed the finger at the guy, saying he did it. The manager immediately fired the guy on the spot. Story 48. I work for a hotel. Had to fire 2 separate employees on 2 different occasions for letting people in vacant rooms to smoke and steal from the rooms.